Welcome, night wanderers. Tonight you'll hear 5 stories about people who discovered that the scariest things don't always happen in haunted houses. Sometimes they live right next door, or behind the counter during the night shift. These stories are based on real fears, loneliness, obsession, madness, and each one leaves a scar. So turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and remember, you never truly know who's watching you at night. Like, subscribe, and tell me, which story kept you awake? Story 1. Apartment 3B. When I first moved into Apartment 3B, the silence felt like a luxury I'd finally earned. The building didn't pretend to be anything it wasn't. A tired 4-story block with cracked tiles in the foyer, a brass mailbox panel permanently smudged with fingerprints, and a faint smell of old varnish and boiled cabbage that seeped from somewhere unseen. It was the kind of place where the elevator groaned, but never quite died, where neighbors nodded, but didn't ask questions. Exactly what I needed after my breakup. Quiet, anonymity, a door that locked. I unpacked slowly, building a new life from old objects. Books filed onto sagging shelves, a thrift store lamp with a warm shade, a potted fern that had survived 3 apartments and 2 winters. I told myself that routines would save me. Morning runs, evening tea, no phone after midnight. It worked for 2 nights. On the second night, I heard tapping from the vent above my bed. Not the erratic clatter of pipes, measured taps, like a code improvised by someone who didn't quite know Morse. 3 taps. Pause. 2 taps. Long pause. 3 again. I lay still, counting, waiting for it to resolve into a pattern I could dismiss. When it didn't, I climbed onto a chair, lifted my phone, and shone the flashlight through the grill. Dust, an old coil of wire, darkness that felt closer than it should. By the third night, the taps came back at 2:31 a.m. on the dot. I decided if I ignored them, they'd dissolve into the background noise of the building, like the elevator cables singing or the neighbor in 2C who coughed through every winter. But when I rolled over and pulled a pillow around my head, I heard something else riding the silence. The faintest breath, a slow exhale that wasn't mine. I sat up too fast and the room tilted. The fern in the window looked like a small, hunched figure. I told myself I was overtired. That morning, while checking my mailbox, I met the woman from 3A. Thin, with neat gray hair and a cardigan buttoned all the way to her throat. She smelled faintly of lavender soap. "You're the new one," she said, evaluating me with pale eyes. "In 3B. "Lena," I said, forcing a smile. She nodded once. "I'm Zoya. Keep your windows locked at night. The draft is worse than the billboards say I will," I said. She watched me a second longer. "Your unit had a man before. Quiet, always watching. He left. Suddenly." I waited for the rest, but she just lifted her mail and retreated, slippers whispering over tile. That night I came home late. The hallway hushed in the way buildings get after 10. Odors held in the air like memories. A single TV murmuring through a wall. My door was almost closed, but not quite. One hinge squeaked when I pushed it. I'd left it shut, I knew I had. But maybe I was careless. I stood still in the entryway and listened. The living room breathed its old varnish smell. The kitchen hummed evenly. My bedroom was a rectangle of dark. Nothing moved. Still, I walked the rooms the way you do after a bad dream. Cupboard doors open and close. Shower curtain pulled aside. Under the bed checked. More to convince yourself than to find anything. It almost worked. Until I saw that the vent above my bed was missing 2 screws. One lay on the nightstand. I hadn't put it there. The faceplate hung slightly crooked. I dragged the chair over, climbed up, and held the phone again. Something caught the light. Metallic, a tiny circle tucked just beyond the lip of the duct. I pinched it free carefully, heart drummed fast. A miniature camera. Old but not ancient. The lens was scratched, and a thin wire trailed back into the darkness where it had been snaked along the duct. There was a pinprick LED beside the lens. As I turned it in my fingers, the light blinked once. Red. My mouth went dry. I didn't sleep in the bedroom that night. I sat on the couch with the lamp on, the camera on the coffee table like a threat I'd disarmed. Around 1, I texted my friend Maya a photo in a rambling paragraph. She replied with a voice note I didn't open. At 2, I made tea. At 2:29, the tapping started again. 3 taps. Pause. 2. Long pause. 3. The sound came not from the vent anymore, but from the wall behind the couch. I turned off the TV, held my breath, and pressed my ear to the drywall. It was there, close enough that I felt the faintest vibration against my cheek. Tap, tap, tap. "Who is this?" I said before I could stop myself. My voice sounded wrong in the quiet. Silence stretched, thin as fishing line. Then so faint I thought I imagined it, a whisper. My name. Not the way friends say it, not the way my mother says it when she's worried. A flat tone, dry, like a recording played on low volume. I grabbed my keys and went into the hall. The corridor spread out under the weak yellow bulbs, the carpet a tired red. I pressed my palm to the shared wall between 3A and 3B. The drywall was cool, no vibration. The tapping had stopped the moment I stepped outside, as if the sound had retreated with me. Zoya's door opened a crack, one blue eye. "Everything all right?" "There's a noise." I pointed toward my door. "In the wall." Her eye flicked to the peephole, then to me. "The walls are old." She paused. "Do you sleep with your vent open?" "Not anymore," I said. I lifted the little camera in my palm like evidence. "I found this." Her expression didn't change. "Then close it," she said, and shut her door. In the morning, I took the camera to work and locked it in my desk drawer because I couldn't stand it in my apartment. I Googled mini duck camera during lunch and got a headache reading specs and worse stories. Back home that evening, I bought a new vent grill and a tube of sealant. I screwed the new faceplate on, pressed the sealant around the edges until it formed a clean white bead. I told the empty room, "Try knocking through that," and immediately wished I hadn't. At 2:31 a.m., a soft scraping rasped from inside the vent. Slow, deliberate, like a finger testing the new seal, finding seams. Then the tapping returned. Not the gentle, polite code from before, but insistently. 3. Pause. 2. Pause. 3. Until the rhythm crawled into my chest and found my heartbeat. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, refusing to move. When it finally stopped, the silence felt worse. The next day, I knocked on the super's office door. He was a heavy man with a nose that had broken at least once and a warm way of saying your name. When I described the tapping and showed him a photo of the camera, he frowned, then shrugged as if the building's moods were a weather pattern he no longer argued with. "We had a man in 3B, he said, kept to himself. Complaints about looking. Police came. Unit was sanitized. Everything legal." He lifted his hands. "If something is in the ducts, I can send a guy next week." "Next week?" He gave me a look I recognized from city offices. Compassionate, immovable. "Don't open the vents," he said. "That's what gets people in trouble." I didn't mention the door I'd found ajar, or the whisper. That night I jammed a chair under the knob anyway, felt foolish, removed it, and put it back. I dragged the couch away from the vent and moved the bed to the far wall so I could watch the grill from across the room. I set my phone to record audio, placed it on the nightstand, and lay down fully clothed. The fern silhouette in the window looked like a hand raised in warning. At 2:29, the recording caught the refrigerator hum, a distant elevator groan, my breathing. At 2:31, the taps started again. 3, 2, 3, followed by something so quiet I only heard it with the volume up, a single dry inhale, like someone who'd been holding their breath too long. And then, unmistakably, the soft, metallic rattle of a screw skittering on metal. I sat up. The new faceplate was trembling minutely against the sealant, as if pressure were being applied from the other side. The bead of sealant pinched and whitened. I watched, frozen, while a thin line opened at the lower edge, no wider than a thread. Cold air slid out and reached me where I sat. "Stop," I said absurdly, and the motion did stop, only to resume a few inches to the right, as if invisible fingers were testing for the weakest point. Something clinked inside the duct. Not a small thing, a slide like a ring or a coin settling. And then, because this was the moment my mind decided to feel kind rather than afraid. I said, "Who are you?" quietly, as if the wall could return the courtesy. The answer didn't come from the vent. It came from my phone, where the audio recording still ran. A voice emerged through the tiny speaker, flat, breathy, a quarter tone off from human. "Lena!" I hadn't spoken my name into the phone. I replayed the last minute. The voice was there again, riding the hiss of the microphone, dry as old paper. I scrubbed backward farther. At 1:03 a.m., buried under the refrigerator hum, the same voice whispered, softer, "Don't move." I stared at the door. The chair I'd wedged under the knob seemed ridiculous against whatever this was. I stepped toward it anyway. On the metal, just above the latch, a new smear interrupted the dull shine, as if a fingertip had dragged there recently. I put my own finger over it. The smear was gritty, and when I smelled the trace that clung to my skin, it wasn't varnish or dust. It was the faint iron smell of old blood.
Behind me, the vent gave one last resigned creak. The faceplate settled. The tapping stopped so completely that the silence rang. In that ringing, something scratched from deeper in the ductwork, retreating along metal, turning a right angle, fading into the building's throat. I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor with my back to the door until the hallway light clicked off at dawn. When I finally stood, my legs trembled. I told myself I'd book a hotel, call the super again, text Maya to come over, do any of the sensible things on a list I could no longer hold in my head. Instead, I walked to the vent and pressed my palm to the grill. The metal was warm. The warmth from the vent wasn't comforting. It pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat beneath metal. I yanked my hand away and told myself it was just trapped heat from the pipes. Still, it felt wrong, too steady, too alive. By morning, I was determined to leave. I even started packing. Clothes, documents, toothbrush thrown into a travel bag with shaking hands. But when I opened my door, I froze. The hallway stretched as usual, quiet, washed in the same sick yellow from the lights, but on my doormat, someone had left something. A screw. Old, rusted, the kind that came from an air vent. I looked up and down the hallway, empty. Zoya's door was closed, though I thought I saw movement through the peephole. I wanted to knock, to demand answers, but the image of her calm eyes and that flat, then close it, echoed too strongly. I pocketed the screw and left for work early. All day, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Not the cliché paranoia, something specific. Like someone knew where I was at all times. My phone camera app wouldn't open, just flickered black whenever I tried. When I checked my email during lunch, I found a new message from an unknown sender. The subject line read, "Stop looking." No text. Just an attachment. Against my better judgment, I opened it. It was a short video, grainy, colorless, filmed from a fixed angle. At first, I thought it was an empty room. Then I realized it was mine. My bedroom. My bed. And in the lower corner of the frame, me, sleeping. The video was timestamped 2 nights ago, at 2:31 a.m. I dropped the phone so fast it clattered to the floor, earning stares from my coworkers. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I deleted the message immediately, emptied the trash, and turned my phone off. That night, I couldn't go home. I sat in a cafe until it closed, then walked the streets, circling my block, convincing myself it was just a sick prank. Maybe the camera had Wi-Fi, maybe someone hacked into it before I found it. But even as I reasoned it through, the pit in my stomach grew heavier. By 3 a.m., exhaustion won. I went back to 3B. The door opened too easily. The chain lock was broken, hanging by one bent screw. I stepped inside, holding my phone like a weapon. The apartment was quiet, too quiet, as if holding its breath. The air smelled faintly metallic. The vent grill was on the floor. The new one I'd sealed yesterday. The sealant torn clean. A sound came from the wall, not tapping this time. Scraping. Slow, deliberate. Then a thud, heavy, inside the wall itself. I stumbled backward, heart hammering. "Who's there?" I shouted, but my voice cracked halfway through. The scraping paused. Then came a voice, low and muffled. "Come back." I didn't wait. I ran out of the apartment barefoot, down the hall, past Zoya's door, which I noticed was wide open now. Inside, the lights flickered weakly. I hesitated only a second before looking in. Her apartment was empty. Not abandoned, just hollow. The furniture was covered in white sheets, thick dust layered on everything. No signs of life. And on the far wall, a hole, small, rectangular, leading straight into the ventilation system. The same kind of vent as mine. Something moved inside it. I saw a flicker of reflection, metal? I couldn't tell. Then the faintest sound, almost kind. Lena. I ran. I didn't stop until I was out on the street, barefoot in the cold, calling for a cab with trembling hands. I checked into a cheap motel 2 miles away and locked the door twice. I told myself I'd go back in daylight, collect my things, and move out. But that morning when I returned with the building manager, the door to 3B was closed and bolted from the inside. He banged on it, shouted my name, then used his key. Inside, everything was as I'd left it, except the vent. It was sealed again. Perfectly clean, like it had never been touched. The sealant smooth and undisturbed. My things were all there. The fern, the books, my bed. But one thing was missing. My phone. We looked for it everywhere, but it was gone. I filed a report at the station, though I could tell the officer thought I was just another paranoid tenant. He wrote something down lazily, gave me a case number, and told me to get some rest. That night, I stayed at a friend's place. But when I plugged in my laptop, an alert popped up. New device connected to your network. The name of the device? 3B camera. I froze, then clicked to disconnect it, but before I could, a notification appeared on the screen. Stop moving. The laptop's webcam light turned on. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. I covered the camera with my hand, slammed the lid shut, unplugged everything. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. Later that night, I couldn't help myself. I opened the laptop again, desperate to delete whatever had infected it. The screen flickered, static crawled across the edges, and then the video window appeared again. Automatic, no controls, no exit. It was me. Sitting there. Watching. And behind me, the vent. The grill trembled once. And a hand, pale, long-fingered, slid out. The image froze on the laptop screen. That pale, bony hand half emerged from the vent, fingers stiff and jointed wrong, as though the bones were placed in the wrong order. For a long second, I didn't move. Then the screen went black. I slammed the laptop shut and threw it across the room. It hit the carpet with a dull thud, the lid snapping open again just enough for the webcam light to blink once, like a dying eye. I unplugged it, stuffed it into a drawer, and sat there in the dark, shaking so hard my teeth ached. By morning, I convinced myself that exhaustion had twisted everything. I was seeing what I wanted to see, a bad dream bleeding into reality. Still, I couldn't stay at my friend's. Every sound made me jump, every shadow felt like a shape that shouldn't exist. I told myself I needed closure. If I went back to 3B just once more, I could end this nightmare. The building looked smaller in daylight, its brick faded to a dull rust. But the moment I stepped inside, the air grew heavier, as if the walls were thicker than they had been before. The super wasn't there this time. His office door was half open, papers scattered across the desk. I called out, but no one answered. When I reached my floor, the hall lights flickered weakly. Zoya's door was sealed with yellow tape now. Maintenance, do not enter. My apartment door, though, stood slightly ajar. The same way it had that first night. The air smelled of dust and something sour, like damp cloth and rust. My voice trembled when I called out. Hello. Nothing. Only the low groan of pipes. Inside, the apartment was exactly as I remembered, except for one thing. The fern was gone. In its place, on the windowsill, sat the little camera I'd found in the vent. Its red light blinked steadily, in perfect rhythm, one flash per second. I approached slowly. My reflection warped across the lens. What do you want? I whispered. The light blinked twice. Then again. Behind me, the vent cover rattled softly, like something moving inside. I turned toward it, expecting a mouse or a bird, anything that could explain the scraping sound. But when the grill slid loose and dropped to the floor, I saw nothing but darkness. Cold air rolled out, heavy, smelling faintly metallic. I crouched, flashlight shaking, and shone it inside. The duct stretched deep into black. But a few feet in, I saw movement, a curve of gray fabric. I reached out carefully, gripping the edge. It wasn't fabric. It was skin. I stumbled backward, screaming. The flashlight fell, its beams spinning across the floor. For a moment, I saw the shape clearly. A face, flattened, half-rotted, pressed against the inside of the vent as though it had grown into the metal. Its mouth opened and closed slowly, like it was trying to breathe through steel. Then it spoke. "Stay." The word rasped out with the dry sound of dust sliding through pipes. I ran. Out the door, down the hallway, past the tape department. But halfway down the stairs, I stopped. Because I heard something below, voices. Not one, but several. They were murmuring, all in the same flat tone, repeating the same word. Sit. Stay. The stairwell lights flickered. I turned the corner, and saw them. 5 figures stood at the bottom, faces pale and expressionless, clothes colorless from dust. They stared up at me silently. I recognized one, the building super. His eyes were blank, pupils washed out like film exposed to sunlight. His mouth twitched. "Maintenance," he said softly. "You shouldn't be here." I bolted for the opposite hall, down toward the basement door. My breath tore at my throat. The door was heavy, but it gave way under my weight. Inside was nothing but darkness and the faint hum of old machinery. I slammed the door behind me, locked it, and leaned against the wall, shaking. My flashlight flickered weakly. The basement stretched deeper than it should, longer than the blueprint I'd once seen in the rental office. The air was damp and full of echoes. Along one wall, I saw a line of old ventilation shafts, each wide enough for a person to crawl through. The metal edges were stained dark. Scratches covered the surface, claw marks, desperate and uneven. I moved closer. The nearest vent had something lodged inside. A small, rotting hand, the fingernails torn away. A noise came from behind me, a dragging sound, soft but deliberate. I turned slowly, light trembling. One of the figures from the stairwell stood in the doorway, head tilted, movements stiff and mechanical. Behind him, others followed, each moving in jerky steps like puppets pulled by invisible strings. I stumbled backward, tripping over debris, until my back hit the wall. My flashlight caught a reflection, dozens of eyes inside the dark vents, blinking slowly, one after another. Then a voice, calm, close, right beside my ear. "You looked. So now you stay." Something cold brushed my wrist. I screamed and ran into the maze of pipes. The figures followed, their movements echoing off the concrete. The tunnels twisted endlessly. Every turn led back to the same vent, the same blinking camera light watching from somewhere above. Finally, I found a ladder leading to a small hatch. I climbed, clawing at the rungs, and burst into daylight. I was outside, gasping, barefoot on the street. The sun burned my eyes. Behind me, the building stood quiet, windows reflecting nothing. I ran until I reached a crowd, people who looked real, warm, human. Someone called an ambulance. They said I was dehydrated, that I'd hallucinated. The police searched the building later that week. They found nothing. No bodies. No holes in the walls. No camera. Just one thing. A note taped to my old door. Apartment 3B is vacant. Please do not enter. Maintenance ongoing. They told me it was normal, standard procedure after a break-in. But sometimes, late at night when I scroll through my phone, I'll see it, a flicker of red in the reflection of the screen. A single blinking light, faint but steady, like a heartbeat behind glass. And when the room is quiet enough, if I listen very closely, I can still hear it. 3 taps. Fuzz. 2 taps. Fuzz. 3 again.
Story 2. The Night Cleaner. I started the night shift at the Greenway supermarket 3 months ago. The pay wasn't good, but it was steady, and at 38, with rent climbing and options shrinking, steady was good enough. Most nights were quiet. Just me, the hum of the freezers and the security cameras watching from every corner. The store closed to customers at midnight, but lights stayed on until 6 a.m. for deliveries and cleaning. There were no windows, only fluorescent bulbs buzzing overhead. Time didn't exist there. Sometimes I'd lose track of hours entirely. The first week passed uneventfully. I mopped the aisles, scrubbed down the deli counter, restocked shelves, and keep an eye on the monitor at the security desk. Just noise, static, hum, my footsteps echoing back at me. Then, one Thursday, I noticed something strange. Around 2:40 a.m., as I was sweeping near aisle 6, the one with the canned soup, I saw wet footprints leading down the aisle. Barefoot. Small. I followed them to the freezer section. They stopped just before the glass doors. I bent down. The prints were fresh, damp, as though someone had walked through spilled water. But there were no puddles, no leaks. I checked every freezer, all closed tight. By the time I circled back, the prints had faded. The next night, they returned. Same time, same aisle. At first, I thought maybe it was my mind playing tricks. I've been working too many back-to-back shifts. But on the security monitors, one of the cameras, aisle 6 again, kept flickering. Every time the image returned, the aisle looked slightly different. A box shifted. A light dimmed. Then, one night, the feed didn't return at all. I went to check in person. The air in aisle 6 was colder than the rest of the store, though the freezers weren't leaking. I pushed my mop bucket slowly down the row, the wheels squeaking against tile. Halfway through, the sound stopped. One wheel refused to move. While I looked down, it was stuck in something, a small puddle of dark water. Except it wasn't water. It was blood. I froze, staring at the tiny red smear beneath the wheel. I blinked, and it was gone. The floor was spotless, the tiles bone dry. I backed away slowly, heart pounding, until my heel hit a metal shelf. I rolled off, clattering against the ground. The sound echoed too long, bouncing down the aisle like it had somewhere to go. I ran to the front and checked the security monitors again. Aisle 6, static. Then for one split second, an image flashed through, a man standing in the middle of the aisle, head tilted downward, barefoot. His skin was gray. His eyes were gone. The screen went black. I called security. The guard on duty, an older guy named Roger, just laughed. Ghosts, huh? You're not the first one to say that. People quit over it. Quit? I asked. He nodded. Happens every year. Aisle 6. Blood, footprints, missing stock. They say it started after that freezer accident. Poor kid got trapped in one back in '09. Died before anyone found him. He said it like gossip, like a story to fill the silence. But the way his voice lowered at the end told me he believed it. I didn't quit. I needed the money. The following week, I brought a small handheld camera from home. I set on the counter near aisle 6, aimed it straight down the row. I told myself I'd catch the leak, or the prankster, or whatever it was. At 2:40 a.m., the lights in that aisle flickered. I walked slowly, mopping, pretending not to look. The air grew heavy, pressing against my skin like humidity before a storm. The sound of the mop dragging across the floor grew louder, wetter. When I reached the end of the aisle, I saw them again, footprints. Bare, wet, smaller than mine. They led to the freezer door, and when I looked up, the glass reflected my face and another behind me. I turned so fast, I slipped on the wet tile. There was no one there. The aisle stretched empty under flickering light. When I turned back, the freezer door was open. The air that poured out was so cold it burned. Inside, behind the stacks of frozen dinners and ice cream, I saw a shape wedged in the corner, small, motionless, face turned toward the door. For a moment, I thought it was a mannequin. Then I saw its eyes move. For a long second, the world held still, just the low hum of the freezer and my own pulse pounding in my ears. The figure's eyes, pale and unfocused, rolled slightly toward me. Its lips parted, stiff and dry, like old leather tearing. A faint sound escaped. Not a word, not a breath, but something in between. I stumbled backward, hitting the opposite shelf. Cans rattled and fell. I blinked, and the freezer was empty. The stacks of frozen dinners were untouched. The air was normal again, cold but ordinary. I stood there for a long time, forcing myself to breathe. My reflection stared back at me from the glass, wide-eyed, pale, ridiculous. I grabbed my mop, muttered a shaky laugh, and told myself what everyone tells themselves in these moments. I'm tired. It's just exhaustion. Just my brain misfiring. Still, I checked the camera footage the next day. At first, it was normal. Me mopping, glancing around nervously, leaning toward the freezer door. But when the freezer opened, the image warped. Like heat distortion, waves of static bending around the frame. Then the video cut out completely for 17 seconds. When it returned, the freezer door was closed. I wasn't there, but something else was. In the very corner of the frame, a handprint, small, faint, pressed against the glass from inside. I showed it to Roger. He frowned, then leaned back in his chair. "That's weird," he said, squinting at the screen. "Could be glare, though, or a smudge." "It wasn't there before," I said. "And look at the size. That's not an adult's hand." He didn't answer, just stared for a while, then turned the monitor off. "Listen," he said finally. "If it's bothering you that much, you can swap shifts. Nobody's forcing you to stay nights." I thought about it, but part of me, the stupid, curious part, wanted to know the truth. The next night, I brought salt. I don't know why. Maybe some instinct left over from childhood ghost stories. I sprinkled it lightly across aisle 6 before I started mopping. A thin white trail between the shelves. For the first few hours, everything was normal. I even started to relax. Then, right around 2:40, the lights flickered. When they came back, the salt trail was broken. Tiny bare footprints marking a clear path through it. I froze, mop in hand. The print stopped halfway down the aisle, right where I stood. Then, one more appeared. I didn't see it appear, but I heard it, a wet, sticky sound like skin peeling off tile. I looked down and there it was. A fresh footprint, inches from my shoe. Something was standing right in front of me. The aisle lights dimmed again. The cold air grew thicker, heavier. A faint sound echoed through the shelves, metal creaking, something brushing against boxes. And then, just barely above the hum of the freezers, a whisper. "Cold." The words stretched, brittle and dry, like ice cracking. I swung the mop blindly, hitting nothing but air. My breath fogged in front of me. I stumbled backward, nearly slipping on the tiles. My shoulder hit the freezer door, and the handle clicked open under the pressure. The cold air poured out again, sharp and chemical. My flashlight beam cut through it, and for an instant I saw him. A boy, maybe 8, maybe younger. Skin blue-gray, hair slicked to his forehead with frost. He stood barefoot among the stacks of frozen food, his eyes unfocused but aware, fixed on me. "Are you cold?" I whispered before I could stop myself. He blinked once, then slowly lifted a hand. His fingers were black at the tips, cracked and bleeding. He pointed past me, toward the far end of the aisle. I turned. Every freezer door was open. A gust of freezing air swept through, making the fluorescent lights above flicker and pop. The noise was deafening, metal clanging, plastic cracking, wind howling through the vents. I ran, slipping and sliding, until I reached the security room. On the monitors, I saw every aisle perfectly lit except one. Aisle 6 was dark, and yet, through the grainy static, I saw movement, small, quick shapes darting between shelves. Not just one child, dozens. They moved like shadows underwater, flickering in and out of view, hands dragging along the tiles. Their heads turned in sync toward the camera. Then, all at once, they looked up, not toward the lens, toward me. The feed cut to black. I didn't go back into the store for almost an hour. I sat outside in the alley, shaking, my uniform soaked with sweat despite the freezing night air. The loading bay lights buzzed above me, flickering like the cheap ones inside. I told myself I'd quit. Walk away, find another job. Anything but this. But I couldn't. Somewhere between the fear and exhaustion, curiosity took over. I needed to know what I'd seen. The kids. The boy. The cameras. I needed proof that it wasn't all in my head. When I finally went back inside, the store felt hollow. The hum of the coolers was gone, the air still and dry. The light stayed on, but the aisles seemed narrower, the shelves taller, like the building had shifted in my absence. I went to the security room first. Every monitor showed static except one. Aisle 6. The feed was dark, but I could make out faint movement, like frost crawling across glass. The image twitched and pulsed, and for half a second I saw a reflection. My own face staring into the camera, except my eyes were black. The sound kicked and then, soft, rhythmic tapping through the speakers. I turned the volume up, and the taps became clearer. It wasn't random. It was a pattern. 3 taps. Pause. 2 taps. Pause. The same pattern I'd seen written in salt. I grabbed my flashlight and started down the aisles. My footsteps echoed against tile. The smell of bleach and cold meat filled the air. When I reached aisle 6, everything looked normal. Clean, organized, bright. Except the floor wasn't dry. A thin trail of water, or what I thought was water, led from the freezers to the employee door in the back. The handle glistened faintly. I followed the trail, flashlight shaking in my hand. The door opened with a soft groan, revealing the stockroom beyond. Stacks of boxes towered over me, casting jagged shadows under the dim emergency light. I turned the flashlight toward the ground, more prints. Barefoot, small, perfectly clear. They led between the boxes toward the back of the room, where the walk-in freezer stood. The heavy metal door was ajar. Inside, my breath fogged the air. The cold bit through my jacket instantly. The light flickered overhead, revealing rows of frozen goods wrapped in plastic, shelves stacked to the ceiling. Everything was covered in a thin film of frost. And then I saw it. A shape hunched in the far corner. Small shoulders, a tilted head. A boy exactly as before. His eyes were open now, focused on me. "Hey," I said before realizing I'd spoken. My voice cracked, echoing sharply in the cold. You're not supposed to be in here." He didn't move. His breath came in short, shallow puffs, each one clouding the air. He was wearing a thin uniform shirt, the old Greenway logo faded to white. His lips trembled. "Are you hurt?" The boy shook his head once, slow. Then he pointed upward, at the vents lining the ceiling. I followed his gaze. Frost had built up around the metal grates, but beneath it, I could see movement. Something slithering behind the slats, the faint outline of fingers pressing outward, bending the metal from the inside. The boy whispered something, too soft to hear. "What?" I asked. He whispered again. This time I caught it. "They're still cold." The lights flickered. When they came back, he was gone. Panic clawed at my throat. I turned to leave, but the door had frozen shut. Ice crept along the edges, locking in place. My breath came fast, forming clouds in the air. The hum of the freezer deepened, vibrating through the floor. Then, through the frost-covered window of the door, I saw faces. Dozens of them. Children, men, women, all pale, their eyes hollow, their skin stiff with frost. They stood pressed against the glass, staring in, unblinking. Some wore store uniforms, others coats and hats from different decades. The hum grew louder. My flashlight flickered out. I pounded on the door, screaming, but the sound died in the thick, frozen air. Then the faces began to move. They weren't outside. They were in the walls, pressed into the frost itself, sliding under the surface like figures trapped in ice. Their mouths opened, but no sound came out. Only the faint groan of the metal straining under pressure. I stumbled back, slipped, hit the ground hard. My head cracked against the tiles, and the world swam. When my vision cleared, the faces were gone. The ice had melted into water. The door was open. I crawled out, gasping, shivering. The store was silent again. I ran to the security office, desperate to call someone, police, fire, anyone. But when I opened the door, the monitors were already on. Every camera feed was live, and in each aisle, I saw myself. Hundreds of copies of me, cleaning, mopping, stocking shelves, all in different parts of the store, moving in perfect rhythm. And on every screen, a small child stood watching me from the end of the aisle, barefoot and still. When the screens flickered, zoomed in on my own face. My reflection turned its head slowly toward the camera. Its lips moved. "You left the door open." Then the feed went black. I don't remember leaving the store. I woke up in the hospital 2 days later, dehydration and frostbite in both hands. They said a truck driver found me wandering the highway, mumbling about the cold. The police investigated the supermarket. They found nothing unusual. No blood, no bodies, no footprints. Just one strange thing. The The temperature inside the store's freezer was recorded at -3 degrees Celsius, exactly normal. But the footage from a security room, every recording from that night, was gone, deleted, all except one frame burned into the static. A single sentence written across the bottom of the screen in dripping black letters. We never left.
Story 3. The Man Upstairs. When I moved into the 3rd floor of the Pine Grove Apartments, the landlady told me there was no one above me. Top floor, she said, smiling through a cloud of cigarette smoke. Quiet as the grave up there. She wasn't lying about the quiet, at first. For the first few nights, the only sounds were the pipes groaning and the wind squeezing through the windows. It was peaceful. Too peaceful. Then, one Thursday at exactly 1:12 a.m., I heard footsteps above my ceiling. Not random creaks, real footsteps. Slow, deliberate, crossing from one end of the ceiling to the other. I lay there in bed, eyes open, counting them. 12 steps, then silence. The next night the same thing. Same time. Same number of steps. When I asked the landlady about it, she waved her hand. Pipes, she said. This place is 70 years old. Everything makes noise. But pipes don't walk. And pipes don't pause halfway across a room like they're listening. By the end of the week, I started keeping track, a little notebook beside my bed. Thursday, 1:12 a.m., 12 steps. Friday, 1:14 a.m., 11 steps. Saturday, 1:13 a.m., 12 steps and a pause. It was so precise it felt intentional, like a routine. Like someone above me was living their life according to a schedule. The strange part was, there was no apartment above mine. The 4th floor had been sealed off years ago after a fire. The stairwell leading up was blocked by a rusted gate and a heavy chain with a padlock. I'd seen it myself. But when I mentioned that to one of my neighbors, an old man in 3C who was always in the hallway smoking, he gave me a strange look. You shouldn't talk about that, he said. Just ignore it. Everyone does. Everyone hears it? I asked. He nodded slowly. Sometimes. That night, I stayed up. I turned off all the lights and sat in the dark with my phone's voice recorder on. At exactly 1:12, the footsteps began. Soft, steady, right above me. I held my breath and listened. Then, for the first time, something different happened. The footsteps stopped halfway across the ceiling. There was a pause, longer than usual. And then, 3 soft knocks. Not from above this time. From my front door. I froze. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The knocks came again, slow, deliberate. 3 of them. I crept to the peephole. The hallway was empty. The light flickered once, then steadied. I opened the door just enough to look. Nothing. But as I closed it again, I noticed something on the floor, a piece of paper folded neatly in half. I picked it up. Inside, written in shaky handwriting, were 3 words. He's still there. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I took the note to the landlady. Her face went pale when she saw it. Where'd you get this? It was under my door last night. She snatched it from my hand, stuffed it into her pocket. You shouldn't keep that. It's from before. Before what? She didn't answer. She just lit another cigarette, looked at the ceiling and said softly, You hear something, you ignore it. You see something you didn't. That night, I put my recorder on again. I also placed my phone camera pointing at the ceiling just in case. I sat on my bed, waiting. 1:11 a.m. Nothing. 1:12 a.m. One creak. Then another. Then the full 12 steps. But this time I saw something. The light fixture in the center of my ceiling, the cheap circular one that buzzed constantly, began to move. Not swing, not shake. It rotated. Slowly. As if someone above it was twisting it by hand. Then I heard it. A whisper. Not from above. From inside the vent near the wall. A man's voice. Don't go upstairs. The whisper seemed to crawl through the vent like smoke, faint but close enough to make my skin tighten. I stared at the metal grate, waiting for something to move behind it. A shadow, a flicker, anything. Nothing came. Just that same slow, mechanical hum of the ceiling light. I tried to convince myself it was the building's ventilation system, that maybe a draft had produced the illusion of a voice. But drafts don't say words. I didn't sleep. I sat with the light on, notebook open, trying to make sense of the pattern. Footsteps, knocks, notes, whispers. The next day, I went up to the 4th floor gate again. The padlock was still there, rusted but solid. I tugged on the gate and to my surprise, it shifted slightly, not locked as tightly as I remembered. Someone had been moving it. The hall beyond was dark. Dust floated in the air like snow. The smell of burned wood still lingered from the old fire. I hesitated, then climbed over the gate. The stairs creaked under my weight. My flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing blackened walls, debris, and the faint outline of old apartment doors. The numbers were almost burned away, but I could still make out 1, 4B. The ceiling above me groaned, and a fine layer of ash fell like gray rain. I should have turned back, but something in me, curiosity, fear, stupidity, pushed me forward. At the end of the hall, I found a door that wasn't burned. Perfectly intact, like the fire had skipped it entirely. The number plate was missing, but the door handle was clean, shiny even. I reached for it, and froze. From behind the door came breathing. Slow, steady. The unmistakable sound of someone standing very close on the other side. "Hello," I whispered. The breathing stopped. Then, a voice, low, calm, male. "You weren't supposed to come up here." My flashlight flickered. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over debris. The door handle turned slowly, but didn't open. I ran. When I reached the gate, I practically jumped over it. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my flashlight. I bolted back into my apartment, locked the door, and slid to the floor, gasping for breath. For a long time I just sat there. Then I noticed something. Footprints. A line of dusty footprints leading from the inside of my door toward my bed. The prints stopped right below the ceiling light. I looked up. The light fixture was gone. Just a dark hole in the ceiling, edges broken and splintered, like something had pulled it out from above. I packed my bag. By morning I was ready to leave, or I thought I was. But when I opened the door, a sheet of paper lay at my feet again. Same fold, same handwriting. This time it said, "Don't leave him alone." I dropped the note and ran straight to the landlady's office. She wasn't there. The room was dark, the air heavy with the smell of cigarettes and old coffee. On the desk, among stacks of unpaid bills and yellowed receipts, I found a file labeled Incident Report, 4B, 1989. The first page was short. Resident reported voices and movement from ceiling. Claimed presence of unknown male in sealed floor above. Apartment 4B inspected, no signs of life. Ceiling access sealed. Case closed. The last page had a single note in red ink. Tenant hanged himself from light fixture for B. I dropped the file. My breath caught in my throat. That night, I stayed awake again. I didn't want to hear the footsteps, but not hearing them would have been worse. The silence meant he was moving somewhere else. At exactly 1:12, the air in my room grew heavier. The light dimmed, then brightened again. And then from the ceiling above my bed, a soft creak. Like someone shifting their weight. I stood, staring upward. The plaster cracked slightly, dust falling onto my pillow. I grabbed my phone and aimed the camera, recording. "Who are you?" I whispered. For a moment, nothing. Then, 3 slow knocks. The sound didn't come from above. It came from inside my closet. The door rattled once, lightly, as if someone had brushed against it. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. My legs wouldn't move. The knob twisted, then stopped. Silence. I forced myself forward, hand trembling on the handle, and pulled the door open. Darkness. Just my clothes hanging still. And then I noticed it, a vent at the very top of the closet wall. I'd never seen it before, hidden behind a loose plank. Something was wedged between the slats. I pulled it free. It was another note. He moved down. I didn't move for a long time after reading that note. He moved down. It didn't make sense, and that was the worst part. It was so simple, so human in tone. Not some supernatural curse or ghostly warning, but a message someone might leave in a building with thin walls and shared air vents. That almost made it worse. I spent the next day trying to distract myself. I worked late, stayed out, ate dinner at a diner until closing time. But when I finally came home, I noticed something wrong the moment I opened the door. The air inside my apartment felt heavier, warmer, like someone had been there, breathing the same space for hours. The smell hit me next, faint but familiar. Cigarette smoke. But not mine. I looked around, nothing out of place. Until I saw my notebook on the table, open to a blank page. Someone had written a single word in shaky pencil lines. Listen. My hands started to shake. I grabbed my phone, opened the voice recorder, and stood perfectly still. For a minute, all I heard was silence. Then, soft breathing. Not from the hallway. From beneath me. I knelt down and pressed my ear to the floor. The breathing grew louder, rhythmic, human. A cough. Then a faint dragging sound, like someone pulling something heavy across the floor below. But that couldn't be right. My apartment was on the bottom level. Below me was only the building's old storage basement, sealed years ago after flooding. I went to the landlady's door again. She answered after what felt like forever, eyes red, hair disheveled. "You need to leave it alone," she said before I even spoke. "You keep listening, it'll start listening back." "What's in the basement?" I demanded. She stared past me, like she hadn't heard the question. Then she whispered, "That's not the basement anymore." I backed away, feeling cold all over. That night, I taped over the vent and turned on every light. I sat on the floor with my back against the wall, waiting for 112. The first sound wasn't footsteps. It was the click of a lock from inside my apartment. Then slow, deliberate movement. Floorboards shifting. A weight dragging. My reflection in the darkened window twitched slightly behind me, like it was lagging by half a second. I turned, flashlight in hand. The light caught something in the corner of the room. A figure, half-shadowed, standing completely still. He was tall, thin, wearing clothes that didn't belong in this decade. His face was turned away, head tilted toward the ceiling. I froze. He raised a hand slowly, trembling, and pointed at the ceiling vent I'd taped shut. The tape peeled away on its own, strip by strip, curling downward. "Who are you?" I whispered. He didn't answer. He just lowered his hand, turned slightly toward me, and that's when I saw his face. Not burned, not monstrous. Just human. But his eyes were gone. Empty sockets, black and dry, staring at nothing but somehow seeing everything. The air grew thick, pressing against my chest. My flashlight flickered. Then the ceiling cracked. Dust fell around me like gray snow. Above, I heard footsteps, not just one pair this time, but many. Moving in sync. Pacing, circling. I bolted for the door. It wouldn't open. The knob turned endlessly in my hand, spinning but never releasing. Behind me, the man took a step forward. "Don't go upstairs," he said again, that same voice from the vent. "It doesn't end." The floorboards groaned beneath us. The sound rose, deep, mechanical, like gears grinding within the walls. The ceiling light flickered violently, spinning faster and faster until the bulb burst. For a split second, the room was illuminated by a blinding flash, and I saw them. Dozens of faces pressed into the walls, pale and stretched thin, mouths open in silent screams. They weren't ghosts. They were people, real, decomposing, fused into the plaster, their fingers clawing from within. And right before the darkness swallowed me again, I realized who they were. The footsteps I'd heard above me every night. The ones who had lived upstairs before the fire. They were still here. When I woke up, it was morning. The sun was spilling through my cracked blinds. The man was gone. The apartment looked untouched, except for one thing. The ceiling light was back in place, perfectly centered, shining as if nothing had happened. The landlady was waiting outside when I finally opened the door. She looked calm, too calm. "You heard him, didn't you?" she asked softly. I nodded. She sighed. "Then you understand. The building keeps them. The ones who don't leave when they should." I moved out that same day. Didn't take anything but a duffel bag and my phone. But some nights, in my new apartment, Newer, brighter, alive. I'll still wake up at 1:12 a.m. And above me, in a ceiling that shouldn't creak, I'll hear 12 slow steps. Then silence.